Mr. Smigel, we're going to talk about all of the fun that you had with animation. Starting with your original tenure at Saturday Night Live, I believe the first time you worked with any kind of animation in a piece was a commercial parody you did. Back to Sling Blade. Talk about the Cluckin' Chicken.
Yes. So that was just a... Cluckin' Chicken is one of my favorite SNL pieces. It was about a chicken mascot for a fast food restaurant. Those kinds of mascots have always cracked me up because they're smiling benignly, even though they're basically saying, "Hi, you're gonna eat the flesh of my relatives. Enjoy." I mean, that's just never understand why they're happy. You know, only the Chick-fil-A people finally figured that out by having the cow mascot.
Right.
So, some people have suggested that this commercial was the inspiration for that.
Really?
Yeah, they're wrong, but they've suggested it, so it makes me feel good.
And I believe the voice of the Cluckin' Chicken was?
Adam Sandler.
That's right.
Was the voice of the Cluckin' Chicken. And he was great. And that's it. It's just the chicken is basically asked by the narrator, like, what is it that makes the Cluckin' Chicken taste so gobnobbity good? It's because I'm flame broiled. And then the chicken basically narrates the process. But instead of just talking about how it's cooked, he takes you from the very beginning. First, my head's cut off. And you see choppity chop, and you see the axe come down, and his head tumbles in the air.
Now, you're using real footage of real chickens being beheaded and dismembered.
Beheaded and gutted and dismembered. Then I'm chopped and gutted and ready to go. You know, wow, those flames are hot. That's why it tastes so good. And, hey, kids, how's the me? It was all that stuff.
So, now, who did the animation for that?
J.J. Settlemeyer. That's how I met J.J. Settlemeyer.
So, and you didn't know him before that?
Jim Signorelli fixed us up.
Oh.
Yes, Jim Signorelli was in charge of all the commercial parodies back then, and he, since the inception of the show through the mid-2000s, I think. And
so what do you think you figured out about animation as, you know, a form for your kind of comedy?
I hadn't really. I mean, that was just a particular sketch that had to be a cartoon. I mean, animation was always a big part of my childhood.
Right.
It was my first real skill that I ever identified was being able to draw when I was a kid. I probably talked about this, how I could draw the Flintstones and Peanuts characters really well and wanted to be a cartoonist, but I never really, then I just got into sketch comedy, and then Cluckin' Chicken was really the first time I got to delve into animation, and then did the Conan show and got to do more of the cartoony humor that that I enjoyed when I was a kid. And then at the Dana Carvey show, one of my goals was to not be Saturday Night Live. Like what I did with Conan. Lauren calls it, you identify yourself by what you're not. But there's a logic to that. And with the Dana Carvey show, I didn't want to be Saturday Night Live. So there were things we did that were deliberately different than SNL. Like we just wanted the sketches wanted to have a lot of like brief kind of sketches in between, and a little laughing-y kind of stuff. And we wanted to have short films. They didn't do short films on SNL at that time. And then cartoons, and didn't have any ideas for cartoons, but then one day Dino came in and said, how about a Wallace and Gromit parody where it's clear that the dog is giving him oral sex? And I was like, no, but I don't know why that connected to my idea, but it just did. It was that quick a conversation where I was like, what about superheroes? The Batman movies were getting more and more overtly homoerotic.
This was when Joel Schumacher
Yes.
was.
Joel
at the
Schumacher
helm.
had taken over the helm, and they were sprouting nipples in there and bigger
their armor,
bulges than
yes.
ever. Yes, and there had always been an old suspicion planted in the 50s by who's the guy who wrote that book about comics and the evil behind comics, and basically saying that Batman and Robin were gay, and as if that's what was considered evil in the
I didn't
book.
know that anybody sort of memorialized sort of a legitimate assertion that was.
Yes.
Okay.
You know who I first heard that from was Lauren, because I was doing a Superman special in the 80s when he turned 50 with Bruce McCullough, and Lauren was just talking about superheroes, and he said, in Batman and Robin, they always had that "are they gay" thing, and I was like, what? But it was something, he grew up in the 50s, and this was a thing back then. So for a certain generation, it always existed, and then it sort of came back in the 90s. And anyway, the whole thing seemed ridiculous to me. And really, Ambiguously Gay Duo was founded on that notion that, like, oh my God, we're just so obsessed with how people fuck. Like, what difference does it make? You know, whether, and I mean, we do it with celebrities, as not anymore so much, thankfully, but my God, in the 90s, you know, and some people would just do it under the guise of, well, we're doing it because they should come out, you know, but there was this titillation aspect to it that reduced intelligent adults to, you know, giggling schoolgirls, basically.
Well, the brilliance of that piece to me is not just all the sort of homoerotic jokes.
Dick jokes, yeah.
Is also in whomever the nemesis is. I think it's originally Big Head.
Yes.
Is when they're sort of caught musing or staring
Yeah.
or contemplating.
That's really what the sketch is about.
That's what's hilarious.
I mean, yeah, the whole thing came out of one shot in my mind when I thought of it, which was like after Ace and Gary are caught like grabbing each other in some sort of a, you know, compromising position that might be interpreted as gay. And then that moment where these super villains who are, you know, really invested in defeating these guys, but they're badly animated and they're standing next to each other and they just do one of these. And then Ace and Gary catch them doing it. Because obviously they've suspected, they get strange looks and they have no idea why. What's everybody looking at? Nothing! Let's continue with our battle here, you know. And that at the time was very, it felt very original because like that kind of injecting awkward behavior into superhero stuff. Now it's just commonplace, all that kind of like, you know, Ricky Gervais Office kind of stuff is pervasive through all kinds of everything. But it felt fresh, and that was really the whole sketch in my mind was about that moment. And then everything else was just gravy. Yes, there's a whole other joke going on about just the fine line between masculinity as a celebrated, you know, requirement of of the male experience and homoeroticism. You know, all that stuff that was all over like the you know, the Stallone movie and Schwarzenegger movies in the 80s, you know. Their chests are glistening. And, you know, Steve Colbert and I we wrote a movie for Ace and Gary that, I've written movies for all these characters, but we wrote an Ace and Gary movie, and Colbert had this great idea for the opening credits where it's just a chest. It's just super muscular chests in a shower. And as the soap kind of drips down the chest, it forms like the opening credits, you know. A Paramount production.
Just in running soap residue.
Yeah, and soap residue on male chests.
It feels very Top Gun to me.
Yeah, there's another one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes.
So you did this on the Dana Carvey show.
Did it on the Dana Carvey show.
And did JJ
it was
do
the
the
first
animation
thing?
for
Yes.
that?
So then we hired JJ because I was very happy with the Cluckin' Chicken. He was shocked to be hired because he thought I wasn't happy because he didn't know me. He doesn't know that. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. We got it. Okay. You know, he didn't understand that that's me being happy.
So what
Joe
direction
Worrywart.
did you give him stylistically for the way the show, that piece should look?
Oh, well, I showed him, we researched cartoons from the 60s. And there's one specific, when, like, I watched, you know, a bunch of things. I got a lot of ideas from just watching cartoons, but like between 60s Green Lantern and I'm trying to remember. Spider-Man, not quite as much. There were other DC comics that were animated.
Like Super Friends?
Super Friends was 70s, and it was a little like that, but not. It was more. There were 60s Superman cartoons too, actually, that are pretty much forgotten. He's Superman, Superman. Remember that theme song?
Of course.
Yeah. So,
Not as good as the Spider-Man theme song.
No, but it's underrated. Very underrated.
Spider-Man.
Superman, the Man of Steel, Superman. It was mostly just the guy singing sounded like Bob Dole. Anyway, so we researched these cartoons, and there was one moment in the Green Lantern that cracked me up where I think his sidekick's name was
Kato.
Yeah. And Green Lantern would fly, and Kato would ride him. Like, you know.
I didn't remember.
Yeah, and so we did the same thing with Gary riding Ace, but we, you know, made a couple of adjustments in terms of penis placement. Oh, yeah.
So now, how did that piece, which was part of the Dana Carvey show, bring you back to Saturday Night Live?
Okay, so the show's canceled, Dana Carvey show. I feel like I'm being pretty heavily scapegoated at the time. For you know, to some degree, deservedly, for some of the bigger decisions, but I also felt like, yeah, a lot of us were in on this stuff, and also I thought it was a pretty good show. So I felt it was a little unfair, but I was worried about what I was going to do next. But I would just daydream about stuff, and Ace and Gary was like one of the most successful things that came out of that. We were going to do another one before it got canceled. And I just started thinking about other cartoons, and I had the idea for the ex-presidents, struck by radiation and at a golf tournament, and they've developed superpowers. And then they play, and then at the end they have like an Archie's kind of band.
Now that was more kind of like Super Frenzy, right? I mean, that idea of the, at least the animation.
Justice League.
Yeah.
It's like Justice League, kind of, yeah. It was the same kind of animation as the 60s stuff, though.
Now, all the ex-presidents were voiced by Jim Morris. Is that
No,
correct?
but a lot of them were. Like, I did go to a lot of trouble I didn't want it to feel like SNL voices. I was going for verisimilitude, and I thought Jim Morris was like super accurate. So I think, and maybe he did all of them. Maybe you're right.
I
think
thought he did. But...
He did do all of them. You're right. Bless his heart. He did all the ex-presidents' voices.
It's funny because you do a great Reagan.
I do a very good Reagan, but his was excellent, and I didn't need to.
And when you did Ambiguously Gay Duo on SNL, the voices for Ace and Gary were?
Carell and Colbert, just like the Dana Carvey. Nothing changed.
Right.
I mean, I showed Lauren this cartoon, and he loved it. And he was like, do 10 of these. Why do you need to do other ideas? He's
so
like,
he
famously said to me, he said, I'm the enemy of creativity. I just want you to do this every week.
Now, that's remarkable, because I just wanted to sort of contrast whatever your previous experience had been. You sort of came back with this kind of autonomy.
Well, it was a beautiful thing. You know how I said earlier how Lorne will, when someone leaves and then he has the opportunity to get him back, he's excited. And and in this case, I called him. He'd been wanting to get me back. He offered me to take over the show. Not take over, but work under him to do what Higgins ended up doing.
Wow.
Yeah, he called me in 1975. And
wait, 75?
God, I'm an old man.
It's okay.
Really old man.
Not that old.
It's true, I'm not that old. I would have been, in my teens. Robert, I know you're only 12, and I'm just starting the show. Maybe this is a panic move, but I saw your bar mitzvah rehearsal, and I just think you've got the chops. Anyway.
No, continue with that.
Yeah, let's do an hour of...
Lorne talking to teenage Robert.
Yeah.
So in
all right, I just want to molest you. Let's just put it on the table. We're...
I'm guessing
it's 1995. It's after the disastrous article. It's after Adam Sandler and Farley are going to get bounced. And he's got all this pressure on him. And we thought, oh my God, are they going to get rid of Lorne? And they didn't. And he didn't. He wanted to stick it out. And I was really happy because I knew that he had it in him to resurrect the show because I'd seen him do it. And I felt like he was getting scapegoated. I thought that article was a hatchet piece. There were problems at the show, but, the show had been good for so long, and then there was a mass exodus the same year I left, and, Turner's left, and Jack Handy left, and Xander, and a lot of great writers, and Dana Carvey left, and, then they made a couple of, maybe, they couldn't quite figure out who to replenish the cast with. But it was a speed bump, that's all it was. And then this article came out treating it as if it was an institutional fiasco of the place. And so I have this meeting with him, and I told him, I thought, I'm just so glad. I know you're going to bring the show back. But he wanted me to work for him and be like what Downey was. And I just was getting offered Carvey's thing at the same time. And I just opted for, to me, that was a more interesting challenge, to succeed in prime time. Because in my head, I always thought SNL, there was a period when I thought SNL should move to prime time. Like Wednesdays or Thursdays at 10. I thought the audience has grown up with the show, and now the sensibility belongs to 30-year-olds as much as it does to, and 40-year-olds as it did to 20-year-olds who stay up late on Saturday night in the 70s. That was my big theory, that it had outgrown its time slot, and Lorne had no interest in letting go of a good thing, and smartly. But anyway, doing it in prime time, doing sketch comedy in prime time was really interesting to me. So I went for the Dana Carvey show. Also, he was interested in having me do sketches sometimes. And I had been funny on the Conan show, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun.
To be a performer.
To be a performer on the show.
Right. And
I didn't want to do, be a full-time like what Carell and Colbert were, but I was like, if there's something I can do that's funny, and I want to do it, then I can do it. And I ended up doing a lot of things on the show. But that's why so the show gets, canceled, kaboom, scapegoat. The one person who's excited to have me back is Lorne Michaels. I called him up and I said, I thought of a way to come back to the show. What do you think of this? I did this one cartoon that I really liked, and I have other ideas for cartoons. He said, let's do it. It was the easiest call I've ever had.
And you got this sort of branded thing where you are now out in front. You are a cartoon by Robert Smigel.
Not my first year.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, I decided to call it, Like, it was always a film by Albert Brooks and a Schiller Vision kind of thing.
Right.
And I like the idea of calling this Saturday TV Funhouse. I like just naming it something else. And then you're right, at the end of the credits, I got a cartoon by Robert Smigel. But the Don Pardo thing happened the next year.
Okay.
I asked for that because I
But-
was like,
but
I might
from-
as well milk this for my career.
But from the get-go, you did have the dog running away with
Yes.
the SNL card with Lorne saying,
Lego my show. Come back here with my show. Yeah, that kind of thing.
right.
Which is maybe the hardest I've ever laughed in my life, watching Lorne watch the cartoon for the first time. Because it was literally like
Now, had anyone,
the
by the way,
child doing it to the principal.
now, had anybody sort of ever gone on record with a Lorne impression at that point? Like, I know that they'd sort of happened behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Is that the first time it happened on the show?
It might have been. It might
That's
have been.
pretty monumental, actually.
I don't know if it was, but it might have been. I mean, I was one of the biggest Lorne imitators when I was a staff writer there. Because I was good at it and I just kept doing it because it was a way to make people laugh. It was like when I was 8 and I could draw people, it was the equivalent of that, making fun of the teacher. So I did it a lot. I impersonated him all the time. Me and Dana Carvey did it the most, I think.
How do you think Mike Myers came to do Lorne, which became Dr. Evil?
Well, by the time everybody started doing Lorne, everybody was doing Lorne by the time I left. It just became a thing. Tom Hanks did a fantastic Lorne.
Oh, really?
Yes, and it inspired the Five Timers Club thing, because Tom Hanks did a bit where Lorne would kind of, Lorne loved to talk about his theories about the show. So he'd talk about the hosts, and he'd say, the first time you do the show, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. I'm taking it all in, and it happens and you don't even realize that you did it. Second time you do the show, it's like, can I be as good? Is it going to work? The first one was so amazing. And then you dive into it and you're like, this might work. Third time you do the show, this is all Tom's bit. And I believe Tom was the one. So when Tom hosted for the 5th time, I pitched this Five Timers Club thing,
That's your idea.
Yeah, it was my idea. I know Lorne says it's his idea, but it was me making fun of Tom's impression of Lorne. Somehow Tom probably convinced Lorne that, I don't know. Or maybe he was called a five-timer. Maybe he was called you're a five-timer. But the idea for the whole club was definitely my idea. And I wrote it with Conan
And
Conan's in that first one. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's like people like Ralph Nader. Oh, well, he didn't get in. Oh, it was like Elliot Gould was a five-timer.
But Ralph Nader was trying to get into the club.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Ralph Nader was, yeah.
Which is hilarious.
What's this rabble doing here? Anyway,
we were
so
going
Lorne,
down the rabbit
you're
hole.
talking
of
about
Lorne impressions.
Lorne. Yes, the first time Lorne ever saw the impression of Lorne. Made me very happy. So yes, the ideas that came out that summer were Ace and Gary I'd done, and then I had the idea for Ex-Presidents, and I had the idea for Fun with Real Audio.
Talk about what Fun with Real Audio was.
Fun with Real Audio was basically the reverse of Clutch Cargo. I just thought, with a cartoon, you can play a practical joke on the voice. Clutch Cargo, we're doing a prank on people's photos.
Right.
And now I can take the audio and do whatever I want with it.
So what was the first Fun with Real Audio?
It was so kind of reductive and nothing. It was just Larry King and Ross Perot having a conversation, and it was just there was no story to it. We just put them in different locations, because they had become very chummy. That was the only premise of it, that they're so chummy. Ross Perot was on his show all the time in the 90s. So we just had them in different locations, continuing the conversation. I don't even remember what they were. I remember there was one where they're both under a table looking at women's legs. That's the only real silly one I remember. But I'm sure there were other. And Lauren loved it, even though it was, really like a 101 kind of version of the idea.
Well, I remember later there was one of some address from Clinton. Perhaps it's sort of Whitewater impeachment era, because I remember people coming and bringing stained garments and showing them to him while he's in the middle of this address.
Yeah, that was his. It was in the height of it was his confession speech.
Right.
And
it was very somber.
People kept lowering, like Bob Dole or somebody kept sneaking in the cum-stained dress.
I remember it was like multiple garments.
And there were a lot of, it was gross. Yeah.
Really gross.
I don't know if I could write it now. It's so funny, like things you would just be grossed out by now, but
I was bringing
whatever.
in garments that looked like a Jackson Pollock, just like covered.
It had covered with stains. It's almost gross to think about that it got on the air, but I guess they felt like it was newsworthy. So, like, I don't think you could just randomly show a cum stain now as easily, even in cartoon form. I had my wind at my back at that point. The cartoons were very popular, so I got away with it. And then it peaked with a something about Mary joke. Right? Because he got some on his head, and then he tried to brush it off, and then he had the
Ed Grimley horn.
Sorry?
Like the Ed Grimley horn. Like
Cameron Diaz, basically. Right. The same joke from that movie, yeah.
So a few other animated pieces. Just a personal favorite because it runs every year this time of year.
Yeah,
Christmas time for the Jews.
Yeah, I always love doing Christmas sketches. They're some of my favorite ones. I did one with Jesus coming back, and Robert Schiller. It was a real audio where the sleazy evangelist doesn't know he's proselytizing and he's selling a lot of weird shit, and Jesus is like tap tap tap, and just get out of here. And then it ends up with a Peanuts tribute, and then this one. Yeah, it's the cartoon I've watched the most by far because it's a song and it's enjoyable and it was a dream to have. That's one of my favorite albums, is Phil Spector's Christmas Gift to You, a Christmas Gift for You, I think it's called.
And you got Darlene
Love.
How did you get Darlene Love?
It's not as hard as it seems. It should be. But it wasn't that hard.
But did you have to sell this idea?
Not so much. She liked the idea, and it's Saturday Night Live. A lot of people want to do Saturday Night Live, and it was a thrill. She came in and sang it, and just killed it. Sounded amazing. And this guy Stephen Gold, who does all my, produces all the music for Dana Carvey show, is how I met him. He and Adam Schlesinger, a great songwriter. And Stephen made it sound exactly like a Phil Spector Wall of Sound song, even though he didn't have nearly the instruments to do it. He just layered it and mixed it, and it's really miraculous. And I have it on my, I have it on my Spotify next to. And I can play it next to the real album, and it sounds like a song on the album.
Totally.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A personal favorite of mine, just because it's so subversive and so dark, The Journey to the Disney Vault.
Ha! Well, I have to say, so I did about 100 cartoons, and maybe 3 of them were someone else's idea. Adam McKay had a couple. My wife had one. And this one was Robert Marionetti, a guy who, so JJ only did the first couple of years as the animator, and then 2 guys who worked for him, Robert Marionetti and David Wachtenheim, did the last 9 years, and they're incredible, funny guys. And Robert just emailed me one day and said, what if the Disney Vault had a lot of skeletons in Disney's closet? And just amazing idea.
Amazing idea.
Yeah. And so I wrote it up, and it is one of my favorites too, yeah.
Did you get the actual, Zippity Doodah from Song of the South? Or did you recreate that?
No, we were allowed to use it because it was parody. And we got a sound-alike guy to say, to sound just like the real guy. Zippity doo-dah, zippity. I don't remember. It was like blacks are inferior. Negroes are inferior in every way. Yeah.
I mean, it's so wrong.
It's wrong, but it's in the context of making fun of a person for being racist. So, that stuff gets so muddied nowadays. Intent should matter in comedy.
Of course. Of course. Yeah. And sometimes people
Nobody has a problem with that, by the way, because it's so clearly what the joke.
Yeah, but so often satire is taken at face value when irony is the obvious intent.
Yeah, intent matters. It matters in crimes and it matters in comedy.
There's a soundbite to use. There's the headline for you, Jenny.
Really?
Intent. It matters in crimes and it should matter in comedy. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Well,
so speaking of this,
yeah,
because you had this kind of autonomy, Lorne basically said to you, like, go make your cartoons, and you just delivered them, and nobody saw them prior to you delivering them, right?
I had so much autonomy and such a long leash, and Lorne was so great to me. He would say to me, I like to be surprised. I don't even want to know. I like to be surprised on Saturday. It's fun for me.
So, did you ever get in trouble? You were given this much room with a TV Funhouse piece.
Trouble, yes. Yes. Michael Jackson.
Continue.
Well, that was the other big idea I had in 1996 was I can do pieces that are like where I take a public figure and I make them sort of a cartoon character and give them a theme song and turn whatever it is about them into a cartoony kind of hook. And in Michael Jackson's case, it was basically a Yogi Bear kind of scenario where, little boys were picnic baskets, essentially. And that was, that was the premise. And it was just treated like that rascally Michael Jackson. He can't get his hands off little boys. You tell him and you tell him, and it doesn't matter. He'll still figure out a way. And so we did one in 1996, did really well. It was one of the earliest cartoons I did. Didn't do another one until like the year 2000. And the problem was there was no news story to motivate it. Like the 1996 one was on the heels of some settlement he had made with one kid. 2000, I honestly think he had just like done a special on CBS or something, and I was just like, what about another Michael Jackson? And then we wrote a really funny one where he's like, he builds a catapult that will propel him over the wall of like a daycare center or some nonsense. It was insane. It's probably the funniest one. Marlon Brando's in it for some reason. I don't know. And they threatened to sue us.
Wow.
Yeah, his lawyers came after us and said this is completely unmotivated. And
unmotivated?
Yeah, well, because they felt like his other ones had been settled, or there was nothing in the news about this. We were just like reaching out. I understood, actually, where it was coming from. And NBC did not want to deal with it. They didn't fight it. So we never ran it again. And it's not, you can't see it. It's not even, I couldn't even put it, I don't think I was even allowed to put it on the DVD many years later.
Now, as I recall, there was another one that was only run one time that had to do with corporate sponsorship.
Yes. That was less, I wouldn't call that getting in trouble. That was the head of NBC, Bob Wright, telling us not to do it again. So I wouldn't say it was trouble. We were biting the hand that feeds us. So I had this idea for conspiracy theory rock instead of schoolhouse rock. And my original idea was that I would just literally take a crazy conspiracy theory like the Kennedy assassination, or Martin Luther King's, or some assassination, and it was an inside job, whatever, and make a whole song about it. And then I had come across recently a chart that was all about how just a few corporations were taking control of the media. It was a chart by an NYU professor. I wish I could remember his name now. I feel bad. He's a brilliant guy. And he, Mark Crispin Miller, brilliant professor at NYU. And he, and the chart really had an impact on me. And I thought, oh, that would be an interesting conspiracy theory rock, just to talk about how, these corporations are buying the networks. And then I got to GE and NBC and thought, oh, well, wouldn't it be cool to then take it another step and make it mostly about GE? Wouldn't that be fun to do on an NBC series? And because I did not have a lot of, I didn't have great feelings about GE at the time. They really were in the midst of some horrendous environmental excesses, and so I thought it would be a fun thing to do, and just to see if I could do it. Mm-hmm. So I wrote it, and it went up the NBC food chain, all the way up to Don Ohlmeyer, who was like, "Oh, it's satire." I give him credit. They were like, "The only thing we'd like you to do," Rick Ludwin, the executive, told me, "is can you just add one line to make the guy who's narrating it, who is a crazy homeless man, kind of like Mel Gibson in that conspiracy theory movie that he did, just make a line that makes it more clear that he's crazy." So I added some line about the voices in my head. And it made no difference to the people watching, ultimately. And it certainly made no difference to Bob Wright, who was the head of NBC, who was the one person it did not go up to. It went all the way to Ohlmeyer, and Ohlmeyer made the call. Wright never knew about it until he came home that night. And Lorne had put it close to the end of the show.
So it aired.
It aired. Mm-hmm. It aired at about 12:35. Mm-hmm. Late in the show. Mostly my pieces were usually in the first half hour. This one was at 12:35, and it so happened that on that night, Lorne thought Bob Wright will probably turn it off after Weekend Update. It's just a different world back then, without the internet commenting on every move.
Right.
He literally thought that might happen, that maybe Bob will just knock off after Update, and we won't have to ever hear about this. But instead, Bob Wright had gone out that night to some sort of function, and he actually came home late. In the middle of SNL, he turned on the show.
Just your luck.
And just got to see this thing, and immediately the repercussions. Actually, I didn't hear anything until months later when the rerun was being made, and then a guy from the control room, who's now retiring, so I don't think he would mind me saying. His name's Bob Caminetti. He was the technical director of the show, and a proud socialist. And he says, "Hey, Rob, have you heard? It's taken off your fucking cartoon. Have you heard about this? It's, yeah, I don't know, the network something. It's bullshit. It's fucking bullshit." And then he told Adam McKay, who was the closest thing to a socialist that he could find him on the writing staff. And Adam McKay was like, "Man, that's bad. That's really bad." And Adam McKay will tell you that he actually called a couple of news outlets, and like I didn't want to have my, I didn't want to have my name attached to anything like that. I wasn't going to make a stink about it, but because I was just too nervous to do stuff like that. but Adam did it secretly. And then it ends up becoming a thing and then sort of embarrassing. Like Lauren had to lie and say, it didn't play funny enough. You know.
Not that it was a corporate thing.
It didn't play comedically. Oh no, they would not admit that it was a corporate thing. No.
Were you concerned that this was going to then jeopardize your ability to continue
No.
making the cartoons?
Not at all. My cartoons were doing really well, and I was flush with the arrogance that went with that, and you know, and the support that Lauren always gave me. You know, I wasn't upset. I wasn't the one who was that upset about it. Like I was bummed, but I was like relieved. I was thrilled that I got to even do it. So, you know, it was actually more awkward after it became a story, and you know, because then it became a source of embarrassment if it had just quietly not happened. But you know, in a way, it was the right thing, I guess, that it got out there. People should know about that kind of thing. Nobody would have noticed it if it hadn't aired again, probably, unless those stories had come out. So, and now, yeah, it's odd because it's not, I don't want to say it didn't play comedically, like he said, or had to say, but it's not the funniest. It's not, I wouldn't put it in my top 50.
Right.
Comedically, probably. But I love it. It was really fun to do, and J.J. Settlemeyer got actual animators he came back and did that one because he knew actual animators who had worked on Schoolhouse Rock.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so he got the actual director of some of the original Schoolhouse Rocks to do it, and he got an artist from Schoolhouse Rock.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
2 other cartoons that'll throw us then into TV Funhouse, the show.
Oh my God,
But
okay.
just a couple of other things I just wanted to touch on, if that's okay.
Sure.
You have talked about how Peanuts, and particularly the Peanuts Christmas special, were so important to you as a child. So talk about sort of doing your version of that for the show.
Right. So I did a couple of Peanuts sketches, didn't I? I mean, I did the one where Jesus is coming back and nobody's noticing him, and or they're trying to avoid him, and he's walking around disillusioned, and he's watching Reverend Ike on a series of TVs, you know, outside a store in the rain, like a you know, electronics store. And it's very, you know, Chaplin-esque in the rain. And then he's like using his hand to just switch channels. And it's like a treacly Happy Days special. And he just keeps switching around. And then finally it lands on Linus describing, you know, quoting scripture. And I thought when you cut to Jesus with a tear in his eye that people would giggle. Because, like, even though I think that's a beautiful moment, and it's the whole half hour of Charlie Brown Christmas is like my favorite half hour of television ever, but I thought I'd get a laugh by cutting to Jesus with a tear in his eye, but nothing. It was dead silence. People were genuinely touched because it's just such a powerful moment. You can't even...
So it's so funny, you weren't intending to evoke emotion.
I thought it would be a sad laugh, but I thought there'd be a laugh, you know. I mean, the rest of the piece was very silly. He's like making Kathy Lee Gifford disappear from a Christmas special, and he's turning an evangelist into a ballerina in a tutu and humiliating him. I thought this would be like sort of poignant but funny, but nothing. Absolute dead silence at the tear, because people love that moment so much. And people were genuinely touched. And then, you know, he's got a tear and he smiles, a sad smile. And then you see him dancing away like a Peanuts character. And Linus and Lucy kicks in. And that gets like a laugh and a cheer. But it was a completely different thing.
It's a really good-hearted piece.
Yeah.
And I just think it was interesting that you were able to sort of channel that little boy that, even though you grew up Jewish, somehow saw a purity in that Christmas.
Oh, I think
Peanuts.
that's why people love it. I mean, Dana Carvey once said to me, I think it was him, it's like for a lot of people, it's actually the most religious experience they have during Christmas. Are those 30 seconds when Linus does that.
Yeah.
Because Christmas has just become this other thing, you know. But when you stop and watch that moment, it's just and it's that way. It affects everybody. Ultimately it's just about, you know, the purity of any religious holiday, you know. So yeah, I was always touched by it. I was a huge Linus person growing up anyway. I dressed as Linus for Halloween.
I didn't know that.
I did do that.
There's another headline for you, Jenny. I dressed as Linus for Halloween.
Dressed as Linus for Halloween, old Jewish man. That's going to be big. And then the other one was a Charlie Brown Christmas that was like the thing that I always laughed at, which was the absurdity of how they would just wave their hands and suddenly this tiny little tree grew into this beautiful thing. So I wrote a cartoon about how they realized that waving their hands around anything would, you know, turn anything shitty into something amazing. Like a broken old down used car would turn into a Maserati and that kind of shit. So, and
I don't know how no one thought of that before, because that's such an obvious joke that
yes,
wave your hands around the broken down tree and it becomes gorgeous.
Yeah. You're right.
That is like
something someone should have thought of.
But I'm so glad you did. All right, we talked about your Lorne impression, but one of the things that I thought was really remarkable is how you kind of like aimed your comedic Scud missile right up the center of that aisle for the 25th anniversary SNL show.
Wow.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, boy.
Because I think there's two versions that exist, right?
No, there's okay. There is a second anniversary cartoon that was part of the script that I took out because the script was so long, where he's hawking, or I don't know. No,
I've seen two versions of it. I remember.
Oh no, one was about the life of a catchphrase.
That was the Lovitz thing.
Yes, but there was like Lauren introduced it, and it was about an anniversary. It was something. Yeah, that was the other cartoon. I wrote two cartoons for the anniversary special.
Why don't you talk about both of them?
Well, one was called The Life of a Catchphrase, and it's like, we get letters, dear Lord, you're a genius. Thank you. But tell me about who makes the decisions to continue running characters? Aren't you getting a little fucking sick of doing the same fucking thing every week? This was at the height of the late 90s where they did more of this. Now they almost have no running characters. But in the late 90s, almost everything was a running character. They had almost no sketches. So, and I did a few sketches making fun of this. And this was one, and it was, you know, he was talking about how some sketches run their course, and I remember, it was like it was Molly Shannon's character. It was like the rule of 7. You know, I love it, 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 I love it. I love it. And then like a cannonball knocks her down. Like you can't go 8 with a catchphrase. There were those kind of jokes. And then there was, there was something called The Life of a Catchphrase. He like an instructional film that he presented. And it was about John Lovitz and saying, yeah, that's the ticket. And I just used the same audio over and over, taking him from, you know, doing it in his bedroom to an audition to the first SNL sketch to growing on a pile of money and women jumping on him. And then Dana Carvey walks in and says, yeah, isn't that special? Yeah, that's the ticket. Cheap, cheap. You know, crickets, I can't do.
Right.
I can't do crickets, so I can't even do that. And then it was all about the...
And then he becomes like a god to the aliens, and...
Yeah, he finally... everything goes to shit, as he keeps saying, yeah, that's the ticket. He's doing it as a greeter at like,
Walmart
Virgin, Walmart, exactly. And then And then somehow aliens hear it, like it's beamed via satellite to, outer space, and aliens pick up on it and they find it really funny, and then they zero in on Old Man Lovitz and, transport him to their planet where he entertains them. And then, so he's become a god on that planet, and then suddenly they start to hear another signal that says, "Isn't that special?" And Lovitz has it destroyed immediately.
So there was that version, but there was
Yes.
also the one where...
Yes, the anniversary show.
Yeah, where Lorne has some remote that makes sycophants jump out of their seats and clutch onto his legs. And I mean, you really kind of stuck your thumb in the eye of the man
Yeah.
for this piece for the anniversary special.
I didn't have kids yet. Can we just leave it at that? No,
All right, let's.
All right. I'll tell you one story about that. So yes, it was Lorne. It came from a place where, like, I worked on the anniversary special, the 15th in 1989, and I kind of like to be. I liked making fun of the pompous, self-congratulatory stuff, and I felt like I didn't really enjoy that special. It's like a lot of people at podiums and introducing, like an award show. I was very like, hey man, very hippie about like what SNL's supposed to be. And so when I was invited to work on the 25th and do a cartoon, I was like, oh, it's going to be another pompous self-congratulatory thing. So I'm gonna just take a big dump on it any way I can. And I didn't mean it with like, there wasn't any wrath in it. It just made me laugh. I just like, this will be so fun to make fun of it as it's happening. So it's Lorne talking about, thank you. I think what has happened in the show, and then there was like a please stand by, like edited for time, la-di-da-di-do-di-do. It was clear that he was going to pontificate about every aspect of the show from 1975 and then to now. And Jimmy Fallon's a hit, and that's the show. And then, and then it continued, and people, and it was all about him deciding who gets to sit where. And there was a whole song written about him where he's dancing in the aisles and placing Gwyneth Paltrow in the front row, Gary Kroger in the back.
It was Gary Kroger you put in the back.
Garrett Morris we'll put him in row 3 because we need someone who's black. It was that kind of stuff. That wasn't even in there. I'm just improvising because I don't remember.
But yes, there was a great song about where people deserve to sit.
Where people are going to sit. And then it ended up with Lovitz doing where he sings at the end, 'cause it's my show. And then Lovitz, and then you see that Lovitz is the conductor, or somebody is conducting him, and it's basically a parody of Long-Haired Hare, a classic Bugs Bunny cartoon. And,
where Bugs Bunny is the conductor and
yes,
Elmer
and
Fudd
he's
is the opera star.
No, there's a real opera star.
Oh,
And,
was it?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And Bugs Bunny's like leaves the glove up there, and
Yes,
the
you
guy
did that
has
exact joke.
Yeah, and the guy has to keep hitting the high note, and then Bugs Bunny says, "Ain't I a stinker?" And I had Lovitz say that at the end. That's all. That's all, folks.
So,
So the story, Jesus Christ. So the story was Lorne was not comfortable with the piece.
really?
Yeah. Like, it was allowed. There was a lot of stress. Like, Mike Shoemaker was one producer. He said, I think the first part's okay. I'm not sure about the second part, the song. And Marcy was like, I think the song's okay, but I think the first part is a little iffy. So I was like, oh, you don't agree? I guess I'll do it all. So we animated the whole thing. And then I get there the day of the show, and Lorne is like, come in, I'm going to have Paul watch it. Paul Simon. This is 1999, right before, like literally an hour before the 25th anniversary show. And I'm in Lorne's office. And I'm just thinking about the 14-year-old guy who watched the show in 1975 or whatever, worshiping these people. Paul Simon was like the second guest host, and he was so funny. And just like, and here I am, can you ever imagine that I would be 25 years later in his office before his 25th anniversary show with Paul Simon as just the three of us, and I've made him horrendously uncomfortable. Who would have dreamed that I would make my hero feel vulnerable and awkward on the 25th anniversary of his...
So you're sitting in there with Paul Simon watching.
He
Paul
says,
Simon
I'm too close to it. Robert, I'm too close to it. So I'm going to have Paul watch it. Sit with us and watch it together. And there was a Paul joke in there too, because it was like, and here's a preview of the 45th anniversary show. And if you'll remember, it was like a skeletal Paul Simon singing, still crazy, but with a toupee. Still with the toupee, but basically a skeleton, still crazy after all these. And I'm sitting there watching Paul watch this. So we just watch it, no laughing, watch the whole thing, and then Paul's like, I think it's affectionate. I don't think it's mean. I don't think it's very funny, but I don't think it's mean. I think it's affectionate. And I was like, thanks. Because it really was.
Yeah.
Really was affectionate. As much as I was making fun of the pomposity of, is that a word, pomposity?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. As much as I was making fun of it, it's not like it gnawed at me. It amused me. And I love Lorne Michaels. And he, especially the last 3 or 4 years, he'd been so good to me, and I've been through a lot with him. And I felt really close to him. So it made me really feel good that he said that. I don't know that it had an impact on Lorne or not, but then I talked to him after the show, and because what happened was the cartoon got spontaneous applause, like when Lorne sang "It's My Show" at the end, and like a long sustained applause before it was over. And I said, Lorne, that was for you. That wasn't for the cartoon. And it was true. They knew that Lorne was being made fun of through the cartoon. And look, by the way, the cartoon did not get a ton of laughs because people were tense. I think people were afraid to laugh at
Well,
it.
because that's not a normal audience for that show.
It's not a normal audience.
That's the other thing that people need to realize.
Well, I thought people would laugh because it's not a normal audience because they all know Lorne, and I thought that's what was going to happen. But then Lorne also had Alec Baldwin do a preface to it and make sure people knew that it was affectionate. He said, Alec Baldwin did a thing like, everybody makes fun of the boss in every environment, and Saturday Night Live's no exception. We all have our Lorne Michaels jokes and impressions. Here's a tribute to the man himself. So it was set up that way as almost like a tribute. So then it got this big applause at a certain point, but it was clearly like for Lorne, like he didn't take a bow in that show. And I don't know if and I felt bad about that somehow. Like I don't know what effect this had on him, but that ended up being his curtain call on the show. It was weird. It was weird.